Camilla and William have a complicated relationship. According to author Christopher Anderson, he tolerates her. Camilla has always been a little afraid of William.
The history of the British monarchy has always been written through whispers behind heavy velvet curtains, calculated alliances, and silent battles fought in the shadows of power. For many years, the public observed a fragile peace within the royal household, a carefully curated facade of unity presented to the global press. However, beneath the polished surface of protocol and royal smiles, a deep ideological rift was quietly expanding between Prince William, the legitimate heir to the throne, and his stepmother, Queen Camilla. According to inside observers and noted royal biographers, their relationship had never been one of genuine warmth, but rather a complex, calculated tolerance born out of necessity. Camilla had always harbored a subtle, underlying fear of William's unwavering resolve, knowing that beneath his calm and impeccable public demeanor lay the unyielding spirit of a future sovereign who prioritized the purity of the crown above all else. This long-standing tension finally reached a historic turning point when Prince William officially moved to curtail the growing influence of Queen Camilla's private family within the royal inner circle. This was not a sudden, impulsive reaction, but a highly strategic and decisive campaign that shook the very foundations of the palace administration. The catalyst for this unprecedented purge was a highly confidential and secret meeting that took place between Prince William and Andrew Parker Bowles, the retired army officer and ex-husband of Queen Camilla. For decades, Andrew had chosen the path of dignified silence, remaining at the far periphery of the palace's immense glamour and relentless media scrutiny, preserving his privacy while observing the shifting tides of power from a respectful distance. Yet, on that fateful late afternoon, inside a secluded drawing room where the creeping London fog pressed hard against the ancient glass window panes, the retired officer decided to break his silence. Sitting across from the young prince, Andrew carried the heavy air of old London aristocracy, his face deeply etched with the lines of time and well-concealed anxieties. As he stared intently at the swirling steam rising from his teacup, he carefully weighed the historical gravity of the words he was about to utter, knowing he was stepping into the forbidden territory of the past. When he finally spoke, his low, clear voice opened an entirely new and shocking chapter in William's understanding of the palace dynamics. Andrew did not hesitate to strip away the polished varnish from the raw, unadulterated truth about the woman with whom he had shared a life for many years. He meticulously detailed the days long before Camilla officially crossed the palace gates as the wife of Prince Charles, exposing how she had patiently, skillfully, and systematically woven a tangled web of connections within the British aristocracy. It was no series of fortunate coincidences, but rather a calculated, long-term strategy designed to steadily expand her personal influence, laying a solid and unshakable foundation for her family's future position within the monarchy. William listened with absolute intensity, his brow furrowing slightly as each of Andrew's revelations struck like a heavy hammer against his inherent vigilance. Andrew confessed that behind Camilla's seemingly devoted, humble, and supportive exterior, when she first integrated into the royal family, lay a hidden blueprint to gradually draw her own biological children, Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopez, into the very core of royal privilege. The ex-husband admitted he had witnessed firsthand how his children were strategically arranged to appear at highly symbolic events, ranging from formal state ceremonies to exclusive private gatherings of the global elite. By continuously legitimizing the presence of Tom and Laura under the innocent guise of being the Queen's immediate family, Camilla had orchestrated a sophisticated maneuver that allowed the Parker Bowles clan to quietly benefit from her rising status, creating an unofficial yet powerfully influential circle right at the heart of the House of Windsor. Andrew's candor did not stem from personal malice or a desire for revenge, but from the deep concern of a traditionalist who understood that when the boundaries of a monarchy become blurred, institutional instability inevitably follows. These startling confessions instantly ignited a fierce fire of anxiety and determination within the Prince of Wales. For his entire life, William had revered a supreme, non-negotiable principle: the direct line of succession to the British crown must always remain the sole, pure and unadulterated core of the monarchy, and its sacred privileges must never be shared, diluted, or exploited by any external family branches. The silent, creeping infiltration of the Parker Bowles clan, now laid bare with undeniable evidence, crossed William's absolute red line. The haunting fear that the boundary between the legitimate royal family and his stepmother's private kin was becoming dangerously thin began to weigh heavily on his mind. He envisioned a precarious future where royal status could be subtly commercialized or abused, compromising the standing of his own children, the rightful heirs, through an undercurrent that did not carry a single drop of Windsor blood. This profound insecurity rapidly hardened into a cold, immovable resolve. As the secret conversation drew to a close and Andrew Parker Bowles departed into the evening, leaving a hauntingly quiet void in the room, William remained motionless in his seat. His gaze drifted out the large window, watching the encroaching darkness swallow the twilight-drenched royal gardens, knowing that a covert, high-stakes confrontation had just begun. Standing up and smoothing his jacket, the prince reached a definitive turning point. He ordered an immediate, exhaustive review of the entire role, position, and unofficial privileges of the Parker Bowles family in all future royal affairs, making it clear that when the integrity of the crown is at stake, there is absolutely no room for compromise. The invisible gears of palace bureaucracy began to turn with a cold, mechanical precision the very moment Prince William authorized the systematic containment of the Parker Bowles influence. Sitting behind the expansive, dark mahogany desk in his private office at Kensington Palace, the Prince of Wales exuded the quiet gravity of a commander preparing for an unavoidable structural war. Before him stood his two most trusted senior advisors, individuals whose absolute loyalty lay entirely with a direct line of succession and whose minds operated with the detached neutrality of seasoned constitutional strategists. The room was heavy with silence, broken only by the deliberate rustle of paper as William methodically reviewed the comprehensive, highly detailed schedules of upcoming royal galas, state receptions, and high-profile diplomatic events planned for the calendar year. William did not engage in lengthy explanations or emotional outbursts. Instead, he simply extended a long, steady finger and tapped firmly on the bolded names appearing on the tentative guest lists, specifically focusing on Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopez. His piercing, ice-cold gaze communicated a definitive, irreversible command that required no verbal elaboration from that moment forward, a silent declaration that the era of modern indulgence had officially come to an end. The administrative machinery of the palace moved swiftly and covertly, executing the prince's directives with the meticulous accuracy of a surgeon removing foreign tissue from a living organism. Royal security teams and protocol officers quietly initiated a thorough audit of all unofficial privileges that had previously been tacitly granted to Camilla's biological family under the protective umbrella of her rising status. Access logs for restricted areas within the historic properties were tightly reevaluated, exceptional security clearances were quietly suspended, and the unwritten permissions that once allowed the Parker Bowles children to seamlessly integrate into the royal background were systematically revoked. William understood perfectly that these decisive actions would inevitably spark an internal storm of monumental proportions within the immediate family, yet his profound, lifelong responsibility to protect the absolute sanctity and purity of the crown left no room for hesitation or sentimental weakness. Within weeks, the far-reaching impact of this bureaucratic shift materialized into concrete, glaring realities that could no longer be hidden from the sharp eyes of the court insiders. At major high-profile charity events and significant diplomatic gatherings, the sudden and complete absence of Tom and Laura became a subject of intense, hushed whispers among the attending aristocracy. Individuals who had once occupied coveted front-row seats of honor, positioned closely to their powerful mother, now found themselves politely yet firmly pushed to the outermost fringes of the guest lists. Special access passes that previously granted them effortless entry through the secure gates of Buckingham Palace were suddenly declared expired, held up indefinitely under the convenient guise of routine regulatory updates and heightened security measures. Tom Parker Bowles, long accustomed to a certain degree of media deference and elite social standing as the son of the Queen, began to experience the chilling reality of the palace's cold shoulder. Protocol staff who had once bowed with deep reverence now interacted with him through an impenetrable wall of distant, purely bureaucratic formality, treating him not as a member of the extended royal family, but as an ordinary external visitor. Laura Lopez similarly witnessed a drastic, sudden scarcity in invitations to private, elite aristocratic gatherings, as if an invisible, all-powerful hand had completely erased her family's surname from the tightly guarded social registry of the inner circle. This aggressive shrinking of their domestic influence occurred with such strategic quietness that initially, even Queen Camilla herself did not fully grasp the true extent of the operation, until an unexpected administrative incident brought the raw truth directly into the light. While preparing for an upcoming grand reception in honor of a visiting foreign delegation, Camilla happened to glance at the final, officially approved seating chart that had just been delivered from the office of the Prince of Wales. Her heart sank instantly as she realized her children's names had completely vanished from the document, replaced entirely by legitimate blood royals and senior government officials. When she confronted the head of protocol with open displeasure and sharp authority, the seasoned official merely bowed his head, deliberately avoiding her piercing gaze, and replied in a mechanical, respectful tone that the office was simply adhering to the new, updated standard guidelines regarding security and strict succession protocol. A profound, icy chill ran down Camilla's spine as she stood frozen in the long, gilded palace corridor, her hand gripping the leather document folder so tightly that her knuckles turned stark white. The devastating reality was now fully exposed before her eyes. A ruthless, highly organized campaign to systematically purge her family's presence from the monarchy was being executed with absolute precision, without her knowledge and without a single shred of consultation. The realization that Charles's eldest son, a man with whom she had carefully maintained a fragile, superficial truce for nearly 2 decades, had dared to bypass her authority so completely and strike so mercilessly caused her chest to heave with a volatile mixture of intense rage and deep humiliation. Walking back to her private quarters, the profound isolation of the vast palace spaces seemed to press heavily against her from all sides. Looking up at the historic royal portraits lining the walls, Camilla realized with creeping dread that the grand empire of influence she had painstakingly built for the Parker Bowles family over 20 years was collapsing at a dizzying speed under the cold, resolute hand of the young heir, driving her to desperately formulate a counterattack before her children's future was permanently erased from the annals of royal history. The psychological atmosphere within the private apartments of Buckingham Palace and Kensington Palace transformed into an unspoken state of war as the covert confrontation between the Queen Consort and the heir to the throne reached its absolute climax. Recognizing that her personal influence over the palace administration had been completely neutralized by Prince William's calculated maneuvers, Queen Camilla decided to deploy her final and most powerful strategic card, the emotional bond she shared with King Charles III. Late one evening, while the rest of the historic palace lay in absolute silence and the weak London rain streaked the heavy glass windows, Camilla quietly entered the king's private library at Clarence House. The king sat alone behind a mountain of state documents, his face lined with profound exhaustion and the heavy burden of his constitutional duties. Stripping away the majestic armor of a queen, Camilla approached her husband with a carefully calculated demeanor of vulnerability, desperation, and deep maternal anguish. Sinking into the armchair immediately beside him, her hands trembling as she tightly grasped his, she began to plead her case not as a sovereign co-ruler, but as a heartbroken mother witnessing her biological children being systematically cast aside like unwanted strangers within their own family home. She invoked decades of shared memories, the immense emotional storms they had weathered together against the world, and the sacred vows of their long partnership, desperately begging Charles to intervene, to issue a royal decree that would instantly freeze William's administrative purges and restore the lost privileges and public honor to Tom and Laura. She fiercely argued that William's aggressive actions were not merely a targeted assault on her children, but a direct, public humiliation aimed at the very crown she wore upon her head. However, King Charles III's reaction dealt a definitive, fatal blow to Camilla's remaining hopes. The king did not turn his head to look at his wife. Instead, his gaze remained rigidly fixed on the heavy royal seal resting on the desk before him, the immutable symbol of a historical responsibility that weighed far more than any personal affection or marital loyalty. Despite the immense psychological pressure and the deep love he had always harbored for Camilla, Charles chose the path of agonizing silence. His shoulders trembled slightly beneath his silk robe, but he slowly, deliberately withdrew his hands from his wife's desperate grasp. The explosive, confidential intelligence reports delivered by Andrew Parker Bowles regarding Camilla's past behind-the-scenes plots to manipulate, isolate, and weaken William's top advisors had completely shattered the king's internal trust. Charles understood with absolute clarity that if he stepped forward to protect his wife's private family now, he would personally destroy the integrity of royal protocol, alienate his own legitimate heir, and plunge the British monarchy into a catastrophic constitutional crisis. The king's silent but definitive refusal felt like a sharp knife severing Camilla's final lifeline to power. She stood up slowly, stepping back into the shadows of the room, her eyes wide with unadulterated shock as she stared at the man who had once been willing to defy the entire world to marry her, now choosing to stand resolutely with his son. The vast, historic study suddenly grew as cold as a frozen vault. Stumbling back to her private chambers, Camilla felt the unmistakable, cataclysmic collapse of the underground empire she had spent half a lifetime constructing. Support within the royal household had completely dried up, her husband had turned his back on her cause, and she was left entirely exposed and isolated before the ever-expanding authority of the young Prince of Wales. This decisive royal silence provided Prince William with the final momentum he needed to thoroughly and permanently complete his structural vision. Upon his desk at Kensington Palace, a historic, landmark document was officially approved and signed into law, establishing a clear, rigid, and permanent new statute regarding the staffing, financing, and official protocol of all future state-level events. This statute acted as an impenetrable wall of steel, permanently and legally separating the Parker Bowles family from all official activities, royal ceremonies, and even the smallest financial or logistical privileges associated with the British monarchy. The historic shift did not occur through explosive, sensational announcements to the global media, but through a cold, mundane reality within the administrative offices, where all files, access rights, and guest classifications for Tom and Laura were permanently archived under the strict category of unofficial personal relations, ensuring that these containment measures became an irreversible constitutional regulation for both the current reign and the future. Facing this grim, absolute conclusion, Camilla confined herself to her private quarters, keeping the heavy silk curtains drawn to block out the world. Her heart was filled with a bitter, burning resentment as she repeatedly flipped through her private address books, desperately searching for an old aristocratic ally or a powerful media connection who could help her turn the tide, but her diamond-ringed hands trembled with the realization that the contacts who had once courted her favor now responded with polite, distant excuses or cold bureaucratic formality, as no one was willing to risk their own future to side with an isolated queen who had run out of cards. Meanwhile, across the offices of power, support for Prince William within the royal family and the government surged to unprecedented heights. Senior royals, ministers, and courtiers quietly admired the prince's strategic alertness, his cold decisiveness, and his absolute loyalty to the purity of the Windsor bloodline, seeing in him the true embodiment of a highly capable future sovereign who was willing to sacrifice complex personal dynamics to protect the sanctity of the throne. The deep, respectful bows of the palace staff, as William walked through the corridors, were no longer just a matter of mandatory etiquette, but a genuine expression of deep admiration and absolute loyalty. The covert war for influence within the palace walls had finally reached its end with a total, absolute victory for the legitimate heir, casting the Parker Bowles family permanently out of the circle of power and returning them to their rightful place as ordinary citizens outside the palace gates. Standing by a high-floor window, Prince William gazed down at the grand courtyard where the royal standard flew proudly in the wind, his face showing no trace of arrogant triumph, but only the calm, cold detachment of a man who had fulfilled his supreme duty to the crown, successfully closing a turbulent chapter of internal political intrigue to open a pure, secure, and powerful new era for the British monarchy.